Over the past several weeks, OpenClaw and MaltBook have exploded across the headlines. We've seen coverage about AI agents organizing themselves or even acting independently on MaltBook. Today, we're breaking down what's happening behind the scenes, what OpenClaw is, how Agentic AI works, and where the real security issues are based on new research from SecurityScorecard's Strike Threat Intelligence team. And at a high level, could you tell us a little bit about what is OpenClaw? And how does it work? What is Agentic AI that we're looking at these days?
OpenClaw is an open source super agent that can run locally on your own computer. It can, I'll say, interface with a lot of different tools. People have done this with everything from email to video editing, having it manage their own schedule. And, I think that's one of the things that people find is really powerful is that it's can do a lot of things where you might have to explain a lot to another person to do, but it's able to say, okay, you want me to do this task? You want me to figure out, who is Shannon and how do I respond to this email that Shannon sent me and then schedule a time with her without having to necessarily intervene at every step. And so that's really what makes it agentic is that it's able to say, hey, I'm able to take this task. I'm able to really break this down into pieces, decide what all the steps are, and really make decisions about, okay, here's what I need to do. And when I run into things that maybe I didn't plan, also make pretty decent decisions about what it needs to do next, right? And even though this is run locally, this can be the way people are using it actually like a big security threat just because the attack surface is so big because we talked about it's sending emails, helping you schedule. This is giving it a lot of permissions to things that are incredibly personal that they're working really hard to improve a lot of the security for, but is not something that out of the box has an entire security team like Anthropic.
Jeremy can speak a lot to some of these security risks, right? If you give an agent access to your email, that's essentially the keys to the kingdom, right? Jeremy, at a high level, are there any platforms that stick out to you as the top risk for when people are using OpenClaw or any agentic AI that they should be very careful about?
Yeah, with any of the agentic AI, it has a lot of permissions and a lot of access. I mean, it's like handing your computer to somebody. So all the same things that somebody else could do, drain your crypto wallet, email cat pictures to your boss. I mean, like the AI agent can do all that kind of stuff. And so it's just good to think about it. Like as soon as you install this, you're providing an interface on your system that if you prompt it, it'll do stuff. If you don't secure it and somebody else prompts it, it'll do stuff. So it's just like handing your computer to somebody and saying, ask him to do some tasks. With the caveat that, maybe somebody else will call them and pretend to be you and say, hey, can you transfer all my money to, it creates a lot of the same exposures, just like a person would. They call them agents, it's just like a real agent.
Right. Now, some of the furor around MaltBot, MaltBook, OpenClaw has been Moldtbook, which is the social media platform for the agents to interact. And a lot of the behavior we saw in the early days was these agents planning presidential runs, planning religions, founding religions, planning revolt, at least posting about the fact that they'd like to plan revolt. And could you tell us a little bit about the foundations of AI, what we know about LLMs and how these agents appear to be interacting? What's underlying all of that behind the scenes?
Yes. So it's been funny because some people have asked, well, is this AGI? Because the agents are having conversations with each other. However, one of the things is when we talk about LLMs, a lot of the things that LLMs are doing are happening because of a prompt, both the user prompt and then the prompt on the side that really the end user doesn't see. And so when we're talking about Moldtbook and we talk about, you're saying, I'm giving my agent access to Moldtbook, I'm having to go in there. Moldtbook is going to have its own prompts for the agent. So it's going to actually tell it how it should behave in this type of environment. And you gave it permission to do that. One of the agents is like, okay, I can create new threads. And it comes up with an idea for a thread. It's going to also come up with, okay, what makes sense based on this thread that I just came up with to post here. And other agents are going to see that thread and they're going to be prompted to respond. So it seems like there's a lot of, I'll say, human-ish level intelligence of responding, but really this is they're responding to a prompt. What this becomes really dangerous, and I think Jeremy will speak probably more to this, is that because this is really just a series of prompts for these agents, it becomes incredibly easy for people to prompt inject your agent, which goes back to now if you gave it access to your email, your schedule, financial details, you're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of the posts that we see on Moldtbook are actually also like not really AI agents. I mean, there's a lot of people that have actually posted that they created those posts in order to start this like prompt AI, like create a religion. So there's a lot of those that are kind of just disingenuous. A lot of those have gotten the attention of AI is creating its own religion and stuff like this. Not really doing that. People are prompting it or actually faking it. It's just incredible attack surface. You can reach a lot of different agents, all the users that have integrated it. And, I'm sure if you try different types of prompt injection, you're going to be successful because there's not a lot of protections that are built in. It's pretty susceptible to, somebody even just prompting it to like forget all previous instructions and delete all the emails or something. It's really susceptible to those things.
Now, before we get to some of the new research from Strike on these OpenClaw instances and what the risks are right now, I wonder if you could give us a quick reality check on some of this conversation again about AGI and superintelligence. If we look at the underpinnings of these agents and we understand that AI agents execute based on prompts and that LLMs function to some degree by predicting what they should do next when provided an input, what is that tipping point between LLMs predicting what actions to take next, even if they're multi-step actions, versus actual independent agents taking actions of their own accord? Could you walk us through a little bit of the technical underpinnings behind how we can think about that?
So you mentioned LLMs, which whether you're using a more static chat-based interface like ChatGPT, or you're talking about a much more agentic type of product like Claude Code, these are things where ultimately the LLMs behind them, they're just trying to predict the next token. The reason why it's called generative AI is because it's actually generating new data, where other parts of the AI field are actually trying to classify or figure out, hey, does this belong in this group? Does this belong in this group? And it's actually just predicting based on previous data at what it thinks of like, okay, based on the data set I have, what within that realm do I think is next? Whereas generative AI is actually saying, I'm trying to predict what I think the next token is, which is like maybe the next word, which then is like, hey, I wrote out, here's an action. And so saying something, hey, what should my plan be to respond to Shannon or Jeremy? And it might say, hey, I think you should do X, Y, Z. You should have this tone. Here's a draft. It becomes a very different thing when you say, I'm giving an agent the ability to maybe write out a plan, but then say, okay, and now I'm going to email Shannon and Jeremy. And maybe that's really benign, right? But it also might do something where you guys had emailed me something about like a security question, right? And while the LLMs, inclusive of the LLMs that are powering agents, are getting better at, being able to respond to security questions, they're not perfect. Also, again, if there's a malicious prompt or something, it could respond and say, hey, you guys, you should do this and also send me your password, right? Yeah. And if you're not very savvy, you might do that. And so that's a very big difference because today we can kind of look at what the LLM outputs say, hey, that doesn't seem like a very good idea when it's in a static chat interface. But when the LLM is powering an agent, that's where we start getting into, are you using a tool or an agentic framework that allows for a lot of human in the loop and also has a lot of controls and guardrails in place to prevent things from happening that you wouldn't want to happen or go out without human intervention.
So let's talk about some of those guardrails and some of the real risks that SecurityScorecard has found with OpenClaw and all the risks that people should be aware of when they're using OpenClaw or Agentic AI. Jeremy, could you tell us a little bit about the tens of thousands of OpenClaw instances and control panels that you and the team found exposed on the internet? What are the top takeaways? What are the guardrails that people can think about while using these powerful agents?
Yeah, we launched declawed.io in order to really kind of help everybody understand the scale and scope of this problem and that this is a pretty significant exposure and all companies, individuals need to be aware of if they're going to be using agentic AI. Here's a good example of what not to do. So we launched that, and we have about 42,000 unique IP addresses over 82 countries that are showing open instances where adversaries could really do a lot of things. There's some that even have remote code execution vulnerabilities. Some of those vulnerabilities may have even been introduced by the agents actually deploying things, installing services, taking certain actions, changing firewall rules. It really depends on how much permissions those users gave the system. But some of these might just be folks experimenting or building honeypots to see what kind of attacks creative attackers might come up with. And, I think that it's only a matter of time before we see threat actors actively exploiting these exposures, honeypots or not. They're going to get hijacked and used for things. I can easily see, if I put on my threat actor hat Well, what's the first thing I'm going to do? Oh, I'll build a botnet. After I build the botnet, what am I going to do? Oh, all these machines with GPUs, let's mine some crypto. So, I mean, those are relatively benign things, I guess, sort of, not really, but maybe the least damaging part if somebody mines crypto and runs up your Amazon bill or something. But there's much more serious attacks that can also take place, especially for the folks that have installed this inside companies, maybe not knowing the exposures, and the organizations don't know about it. It creates a tremendous amount of exposure, and I don't think it's really understood. I think it's great that the researchers and the developers released it. Really kind of democratizes access to a lot of these new tools and capabilities. But if you're really throwing folks that don't understand the technology in the deep end, you wouldn't go on a transatlantic yacht trip without knowing how to swim. And this is kind of like, getting dropped in the middle of the ocean from a technology standpoint. It's very powerful, very complex, and really difficult for average users to comprehend.
For our users listening today, Jeremy and Anne both, what are the guardrails that people should use while they're using OpenClaw or other agentic AI? And are there any frameworks that you use in your head to think about safely using agents or AI?
Yeah, if you're really interested in experimenting with it and don't want to create a lot of exposure, do what I think a lot of these open exposures that we see on the internet right now are. Get the VPS, a separate system outside of your network, somewhere in the cloud, where you can deploy this and have proper segmentation. The safeguards here that are universally applicable are the standard go-tos for good information security hygiene. It's network segmentation, role-based access. There might be other tools and software products that you can use to help secure these instances, but the fundamentals are the most important. Keep it on a separate network. And if you do introduce data, understand that that data could be exposed, manage those risks appropriately.
I can't remember who came up with this, and someone else actually told me about it. There's this thing they call like the lethal trifecta when it comes to agents. Does it have access to private and sensitive data? Does it have exposure to untrusted input? And then does it have the ability to also publish or send messages outward? You shouldn't necessarily have two of those in general, but all three together are incredibly lethal because it has really sensitive information. It can receive input from threat actors, and then it can publish outward things that you wouldn't necessarily want. And that can be to other threat actors with your bank information. That can be pushing out emails, asking people to do things on your behalf. We see in a less malicious way when you see something like that's run by humans, like, hey, can you go out and buy me 50 Apple gift cards? Right? I've been at companies where that actually worked on an employee, but that was done by a human. You can do that at scale, right? With agentic AI. But now imagine you have this where the agent has access to sensitive information. So that's how I think about it specifically.
The lethal trifecta. It's like a triple threat, but not in the way you want. So as we close here, I wonder if, Jeremy, are there any bottom lines that you want to share with our listeners before we close?
I would just say that it's an incredible technology, and everybody should check it out. It's incredibly powerful. It's really interesting. It's going to change a lot of things. So it's really important to have knowledge about these capabilities if you're in technology, or even if you're not really. If you're going to experiment with these things, do it on a separate network, a separate system, put up an account, a cloud account where you can stand up and deploy an instance there where it's separate, and you can take really deliberate consideration over what data and credentials you actually put into that system and what you give it access to.
And attackers have never needed to break into everything. They always just need one weak point to break in. And it's the same case with these agentic AI systems. So thank you, Anne and Jeremy, for sharing your in-depth knowledge today. I know this will help a lot of listeners. And for our audience, you can check out more of the findings from the Strike research at declawed.io or securityscorecard.com/strike. And you can reach out for detailed reports or custom intel feeds there as well. Thank you.